Hey folks, John Peterson here, and in today's video I wanted to just kind of give you a quick update on my experience with the Fujifilm XT5. Now I've had this camera for about 6 months now, and it's an upgrade from my XT3, which I've had for several years, which I absolutely loved. Now for me personally, I skipped the XT4 because it was too much of a video-centric camera. And I'm primarily a stills photographer, so the video features in the 4 and some of the way the ergonomics were set up, it just didn't feel like the camera for me. So I skipped the 4 and I waited and got the 5 about 6 months ago. Now I've taken it out at least a dozen times, and I've had it on I think 4 different photo workshops that I've run, which have been great. I took it, I think I started off in the Tetons, then I took it out to Iceland with me and Oregon coast a couple of times, and now I'm headed off to the Palouse with it. And I wanted to give you just a couple of quick impressions of my experience so far with the XT5. Now I did an initial impressions video that you can see up here when I got back from Iceland. And when I, in that video, what I mentioned, a couple of things I didn't like was that a few of the command dials on top would change as I brought my camera out of the bag or put it into the bag. And so when I grabbed my camera out and started shooting, I discovered that my settings had changed from when I last put it in. I found that kind of annoying and didn't really care for it that much. And you know, I lost my eye cup, and there were a few minor niggly things that bothered me in that initial outing in the winter conditions. But since then, I've had the chance to use it under more kind of normal circumstances, and I'm really liking this camera. It feels very similar to the XT3 that I'm shooting this video on. It's very much a still photographer centric camera, but it still has all the great features if I wanted to shoot video, which I do on location. I'll end up shooting video. But I wanted to run through just a couple of the pros and cons that I'm finding so far after about 6 months with this camera. So let's start off on the cons. And one of the things I've noticed over the last couple of outings is that I get a couple of more error messages than I used to with the XT3, and that's really about writing to the card. I get a write error every now and again, and it generally I don't lose any images, which is great. It's just kind of an annoyance, and it kind of makes me lose a little bit of confidence in the camera. But it's a minor thing. I really just cycle the camera on or off, and it clears the error, and I just keep on shooting. I've noticed a little kind of squiggly behavior when I had the 50 to 140 on, and just the way it was focusing was a little bit funny to me compared to the XT3. It could have been the user. It more than likely was the user. But it just sort of caught my attention as a con. One of the other, I wouldn't even say it's a con, it's just a function of packing this many megapixels onto this size of sensor, is there's slightly more noise in the XT5 than there is in the XT3, at least what I've been finding. Just slightly more, and that's really down to the pixel peeping level. But you know, we're cramming 40 some odd megapixels onto an APS-C size sensor. And so invariably that may lead to more noise compared to the 26 megapixels on the XT3. And so, you know, I generally run most of my photographs through Topaz denoise just to clean up and add just a little bit of edge sharpness to it. And so I haven't noticed it being a problem. It just requires that little extra step for me to run it through denoise. It's not required. The noise isn't bothersome or annoying, but in the photographs that I do, I want the utmost in quality, and so I will go through that extra step. And, you know, just understand, folks, these are small little cons. These are not big issues whatsoever, and it's not a big enough of an issue that I would say don't buy this camera. It is a fantastic camera, don't get me wrong. So, you know, what I've noticed kind of in the improvement column for me in getting used to using this camera, you know, they've moved a few of the functions up here on the dials. And the first improvement for me, maybe it's just the way I'm using it, is that my buttons or my dials are not moving nearly as much as they did in the first couple of outings. And so maybe they're either breaking in or I'm using the camera just a little bit differently. Don't know which, but I'm finding less of a problem with that. The other thing that I'm really liking about this camera, believe it or not, initially this was a con for me, but now it's sort of turning into a pro. The sub dial under the shutter speed on the XT3 was the photometry dial, so that would change how it metered how the camera metered the scene. Fuji removed that, and they put a switch between still photography and movie photography. And so you can easily switch between stills and movie. Previously, it was on the sub dial over here under the ISO dial. It was just another one of the selections. And I really like how Fuji has separated the movie function from the ISO sub dial. Makes it really easy to flip back and forth between movies and stills. And I'm really kind of liking that. I originally thought it was a problem, but now I'm seeing the benefit of that and enjoying it. And I've got my photometry settings on one of my D-pad, programmed onto one of my D-pad buttons. And so I haven't lost the functionality for quick access. It's just moved location. You know, the image quality out of this camera is absolutely fantastic. I love the files that continue to come out of these Fuji cameras. So the next thing that I want to call out in the Pro column for me is the in-body image stabilization. That was the one thing about the XT4 that I regret not buying it for, was the IBIS. XT3 doesn't have in-body stabilization. XT4 brought it, and then the XT5 continued it. So this camera does have in-body image stabilization. That is probably the main reason why I bought this camera. I wanted that stabilization in my camera. This allows me to handhold shots a little bit lower shutter speed than what I could with the XT3, and it just helps up my keeper rates when I'm hand-holding photographs. I do a lot of landscape work and I use a tripod most of the time, but there are occasions where I do handhold, and with that I wanted the IBIS. And the IBIS in here, I think it gives me about 5 stops of image stabilization to allow me to lower my shutter speed if I need to. But you know, the higher ISO performance of these cameras is fantastic. So between bumping up my ISO and the in-body image stabilization, I'm able to get some incredibly sharp shots at slower shutter speeds. And along with that, the image quality that comes out of these Fuji cameras is just amazing. I'm still blown away by the color science that Fujifilm uses, and the film simulations that are applied to the JPEG files. I'm using more and more of those. I'm probably shooting 40% JPEGs now, and using 40% JPEGs and 60% RAWs in my workflow. You know, I always shoot both JPEG and RAW. I write the RAW to one card and the JPEG to the other, and I'll play around with film simulations. And I'll either use those JPEGs with a film simulation applied straight out of the camera, just apply some post-processing to it, or I will use it as a guide for editing my RAW files for a look that I may want. I may want classic chrome, I may want acros, but I want to use the RAW file. So I'll use the JPEG with the film simulation as a guidepost to inform my post-processing. So the image quality is fantastic. And, you know, recently I did a workshop on the Oregon coast, and I took my folks to a fishing harbor. And the fishing harbors are fantastic. I love shooting there because there's a ton of pattern shapes, textures, and colors. And shooting these types of things helps us spot patterns, shapes, and textures and work to compose them in a photograph, which then helps us in all of the other photography that we like to do. And I was walking around the fishing harbor with my XT5 and my 50 to 140 handheld, shooting photographs. And I tell you, a few of the images that I got blew my socks off when I got home and saw them on the big monitor. Just incredible sharpness, incredible tonality that came out of this camera. So I'm a huge fan of the XT5, and seeing the results with the 50 to 140, and then I got some incredible shots with the 60 millimeter macro as well. That blew me away. And let me show you just a couple of shots real quick for you to take a look at what I'm talking about. Then I think the last pro that I just want to mention here with this camera is that this Fujifilm pivoted away, a little bit away from the X-T4, back to its core beliefs around still photography. This is set up and configured and built with still photographers in mind that, oh yeah, you can do some video. Where the XT4 was, you know, stills and video was about 50-50 priority in the design of that camera. This is probably 80% stills and 20% video. You know, the flippy screen got changed. The command dial up here is a little different. The way just this whole camera operates is really focused on still photography, and that speaks to me in what I like to do. So this really hit its target for me as a target audience, as a Fujifilm user. So absolutely love the camera. So there you go. You know, 6 months into it, loving this camera. I'm off to the Palouse to go shoot some farmland in Americana, a lot of long telephoto stuff, a lot of macro, a lot of abstracts. It's going to be fun to use this new camera in that setting. It'll be the first time for me. You know, I've shot the Palouse for many years, and each time I bring a new camera there, I'm excited to see the results that come out of it. So I'll post another video when I'm back from the Palouse and let you know how this bad boy does. So there you go. Thanks for watching. You know, please subscribe, please like, do all that kind of good stuff. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.